In a small rural town, there was an old abandoned metalworking shop on the outskirts. Locals told stories about strange noises coming from there at night. 5 friends decide to explore the place during a camping trip. Upon entering the ruined building, they find old rusty tools and dust-covered machines. Suddenly, they hear the sound of a chainsaw starting up. Frightened, they try to escape, but the doors close by themselves. A shadowy figure emerges from the darkness, wielding a chainsaw. The friends scatter in panic. One by one, they are cornered by the mysterious killer. Only Maria manages to escape, running through the dark forest as the sound of the chainsaw echoes behind her. At dawn, the police find the place empty, with no sign of the bodies or the killer. Maria tries to tell her story, but no one believes her. The legend of the haunted metalworking shop grows, and residents avoid approaching the place at night, fearing they'll hear the chainsaws buzz again. Maria, the sole survivor, spends the following years tormented by memories of that terrible night. She tries to move on with her life, but the nightmares persist. 10 years later, a series of mysterious disappearances begin to occur in the town. Victims vanish without a trace, always at night. The older residents start whispering about the curse of the metalworking shop. Determined to uncover the truth and face her fears, Maria decides to return to the site. As she approaches the abandoned building, she notices the lights are on and hears the familiar sound of machines working. Inside the shop, Maria finds a gruesome scene. The walls are covered with photographs of missing victims, and there's a grotesque collection of sculptures made from human remains and metal parts. While investigating, she discovers an old diary that reveals the killer's origin, a former employee of the metalworking shop who suffered a terrible accident with a chainsaw, disfiguring his face. Driven mad by pain and rejection, he swore revenge against the town that abandoned him. Suddenly, the lights go out. Maria hears footsteps approaching and the sound of the chainsaw starting up. She hides, knowing she'll have to face the killer to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. With her heart racing, Maria hides behind an old hydraulic press. The chainsaw's buzz grows louder as the killer approaches. She holds her breath, trying not to make a sound. Suddenly, a gloved hand grabs her shoulder. Maria screams and turns around, facing the killer's deformed mask. She manages to break free and runs through the shop, knocking over objects to slow down her pursuer. Maria finds a ladder leading to the second floor. Climbing quickly, she reaches a suspended walkway above the factory floor. The killer follows her, dangerously swaying the rusty structure with his weight. Cornered at the end of the walkway, Maria notices a hanging chain leading to a large metal hook. With no other option, she grabs the chain and swings away from the killer. The villain, furious, tries to reach her, but the additional weight causes the walkway to give way. He falls, becoming trapped in the debris. His chainsaw slips away. Maria, seeing an opportunity, descends from the chain and grabs the saw. With trembling hands, she approaches the trapped killer. He begs for mercy, his voice distorted by the mask. At this crucial moment, Maria must decide: end the terror once and for all or call the authorities and let justice take its course. The sound of distant sirens breaks the tense silence. Someone must have heard the screams and called the police. Maria turns off the saw and backs away, leaving the killer's fate in the hands of the law. Days later, with the criminal arrested and the victims' families finally having closure, the town decides to demolish the old metalworking shop, burying the horrors of the past. Maria, although still haunted by memories, feels she can finally move forward, knowing that the nightmare has come to an end. 5 years later, the small town tries to put the traumatic events of the metalworking shop behind them. The site where the building stood has been turned into a memorial for the victims, with a small park and a commemorative plaque. Maria, now 35, has become a trauma counselor, helping others deal with traumatic experiences. She still struggles with occasional nightmares, but has found a way to channel her experience into something positive. The trial of the killer, known in the media as Jed the Sawyer, he attracted national attention. He was sentenced to life in prison, but the motives behind his acts continue to be a subject of debate and morbid fascination. One day, Maria receives an anonymous letter. Upon opening it, she finds only a small piece of rusty metal, apparently from the old metalworking shop, and a note that says, "It's not over." Disturbed, Maria begins to investigate. She discovers that some items from the metalworking shop were sold as macabre souvenirs in online auctions. Worse still, there seems to be a cult growing around the legend of the Sawyer, with people imitating his crimes in other cities. Maria realizes that, although the original killer is imprisoned, the legacy of terror he created continues to spread. She decides she can't stand idle while this happens. With the help of a retired detective who worked on the original case, Maria begins tracking the buyers of items from the metalworking shop and investigating the copycat crimes. She knows she's putting herself in danger again, but is determined to prevent history from repeating itself. Meanwhile, in the maximum security prison, the Sawyer receives an unexpected visit. A young lawyer, fascinated by his story, offers his services for an appeal. A twisted smile forms under the killer's mask as he considers the possibility of one day returning to the streets. The story ends with Maria preparing to face a new wave of terror, determined to protect others from experiencing what she went through, while the threat of the Sawyer's return looms in the air. Maria and the retired detective, Carlos, begin tracking the buyers of items from the metalworking shop. They discover a disturbing pattern. Many of the buyers have histories of violent or obsessive behavior. During their investigations, they come across a secret online forum dedicated to the Sawyer. Members discuss the crimes in morbid detail and share conspiracy theories about the killer's true motives. Maria infiltrates the forum, pretending to be an admirer of the Sawyer. She discovers plans for a secret meeting of the cult's most dedicated members. The chosen location? An abandoned metalworking shop in a neighboring town. Meanwhile, the young lawyer, Lucas, begins working on the Sawyer's appeal. He uncovers inconsistencies in the original case and argues that the killer may have had an accomplice who was never caught. On the night of the cult meeting, Maria and Carlos position themselves near the abandoned metalworking shop. They watch in horror as dozens of people arrive, all wearing masks similar to the Sawyer's. Inside the shop, the cult leader reveals his plan to recreate the original crimes on a larger scale, spreading terror across the country. Maria, disguised among the members, secretly records everything. Suddenly, sirens sound in the distance. Someone has discovered the meeting and called the police. Chaos ensues as cult members try to flee. Amidst the confusion, Maria notices something strange. The cult leader seems to be limping in a familiar way. She remembers a detail from the original case that was never made public. The Sawyer had a slight limp due to an old injury. With a shock of recognition, Maria realizes that the supposed accomplice mentioned by Lucas might be real, and is leading the cult. The Sawyer's story is more complex and terrifying than anyone imagined. As the police surround the place, Maria finds herself faced with a crucial choice: reveal her identity and what she's discovered, risking her own safety, or remain undercover and continue investigating the deeper ramifications of this web of terror. The story ends with Maria making her decision, knowing that the nightmare that began so many years ago is far from over, and that she might be the only one capable of finally putting an end to it. Maria decides to reveal her identity. She shouts to the police, identifying herself and pointing out the cult leader. In the ensuing confusion, the leader manages to escape, but many cult members are arrested. In the following days, the news spreads quickly. The media becomes obsessed with the story of the survivor turned investigator. Maria finds herself at the center of a media storm, receiving both praise and threats. Lawyer Lucas, upon learning of the new developments, intensifies his efforts to reopen the Sawyer's case. He argues that if there was an accomplice, the entire trial may have been compromised. Meanwhile, the police begin a manhunt for the fugitive cult leader. Maria, trusting her memories and instincts, helps create a profile of the suspect. She's convinced he has a personal connection to the original Sawyer. During the investigation, Maria discovers a series of unsolved murders that occurred before the Sawyer's crimes. The patterns are similar, but not identical. She begins to suspect that the true mastermind behind everything may have been active for much longer than anyone thought. The search leads Maria and Carlos to a small coastal town, where they find evidence that the cult leader might be hiding. Upon arriving, they discover a closed and hostile community, reluctant to talk to strangers. Investigating in secret, they discover an isolated house on the outskirts of town. As they approach at night, they hear the familiar sound of a chainsaw. Maria, knowing this could be the decisive moment, needs to choose: wait for backup or confront the possible killer immediately, risking her life once again. The tension reaches its peak as Maria decides to act. She and Carlos approach the house, prepared for what they might find. As they open the door, they're greeted by a shocking scene that defies all their expectations and threatens to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the case. The story ends with Maria face to face with the truth behind the mystery that has consumed her life, ready for a final confrontation that will determine not only her fate but the future of the entire Sawyer saga. Maria and Carlos enter the house, their hearts racing. The sound of the chainsaw gets louder. They follow the noise to the basement, where they encounter a surprising scene. An elderly man works on a wooden sculpture, using a chainsaw. Seeing the intruders, he turns off the tool and turns around. His face is marked by old scars. "I've been expecting you, Maria," he says calmly. The man introduces himself as Frank, the father of the original Sawyer. He reveals a shocking story. He was the one who started the killings decades ago, inspiring his disturbed son to follow in his footsteps. Frank was the true mastermind, the hidden accomplice who was never discovered. As Frank speaks, Maria notices photos on the walls, images of her over the years. Frank admits he's been watching her since the incident at the metalworking shop, fascinated by her survival and determination. Suddenly, the basement door closes. The cult leader, who had been hiding, appears with a chainsaw. He's the younger brother of the original Sawyer, raised by Frank to continue the legacy. An intense fight ensues. Maria and Carlos struggle for survival, using their intelligence and the environment around them. At the climax of the battle, Frank tries to stop his younger son, realizing his obsession has gone too far. In the final confrontation, Maria manages to disarm the cult leader. Frank, injured in the conflict, confesses everything, providing evidence that can finally close the case. Sirens sound in the distance. Carlos had secretly alerted the police before they entered the house. When the authorities arrive, they find Maria injured but victorious, with the true culprits captured. In the weeks that follow, the truth comes to light. The Sawyer case is reopened, and many mysteries are finally solved. The original son in prison is reassessed in light of new evidence about his father's influence. Maria, though deeply affected by the experience, finds a sense of closure. She writes a book detailing the entire story, hoping it will help other trauma victims find strength. The story ends with Maria visiting the victim's memorial. She leaves a flower and looks to the future, knowing that although the scars remain, she is finally free from the nightmare that has haunted her for so long. This climax concludes the saga, revealing the complex truth behind the crimes and offering a conclusion to Maria's journey. Maria's book, Echoes from the Metalworking Shop, becomes an international bestseller. It not only details the Sawyer case, but also addresses broader themes of trauma, obsession, and the nature of evil. The book generates discussions about the criminal justice system and the psychology of serial killers. Maria becomes a sought-after speaker, sharing her story at conferences on criminology and mental health. She uses her platform to advocate for better support for victims of violent crimes and their families. The case leads to a review of unsolved crimes across the country. Several cold cases are reopened, and some are solved thanks to new evidence and investigative techniques inspired by the Sawyer case. A multi-part documentary about the case is produced by a major streaming service, bringing even more attention to the story. This leads to a public debate about the glorification of killers and the ethics of true crime entertainment. The original Sawyer's son, still in prison, agrees to participate in an extensive psychological study. The results offer new insights into the interaction between genetics, upbringing, and trauma in shaping violent behaviors. The small coastal town where the final confrontation took place becomes a site of dark tourism, much to the discomfort of many local residents. This leads to discussions about how communities deal with the legacies of notorious crimes. Maria, although relieved to have found answers, struggles with the ongoing attention and expectations placed on her. She begins working with a therapist to process her complex feelings about her role in the story. 5 years after the case closure, Maria establishes a foundation to help survivors of violent crimes. The foundation offers counseling, legal support, and scholarships for survivors who wish to pursue careers in fields related to justice or mental health. A fiction series loosely based on the Sawyer case is announced, generating controversy. Maria finds herself in a difficult position, balancing her desire to control her own narrative with the reality that her story now belongs, in a sense, to the public domain. Meanwhile, rumors of a new cult inspired by the Sawyer begin to circulate online. Maria, now considered an expert on the subject, is called to consult with authorities. She finds herself facing a dilemma: continue to be involved or try to leave the past behind once and for all. The story ends with Maria contemplating her future, aware that the Sawyer's legacy will continue to echo in her life and society, but determined to use her experience to create positive changes in the world. 10 years after the closure of the original case, Maria, now 45, has become a respected figure in the field of criminology and victim advocacy. Her foundation has grown, helping hundreds of violent crime survivors across the country. One day, Maria receives a disturbing call. A new serial killer has emerged in a Midwestern American town, and their modus operandi is frighteningly familiar. Victims are found with chainsaw marks, and the killer leaves small wooden sculptures at the crime scenes. Reluctantly, but feeling obligated to help, Maria accepts an invitation to act as a consultant on the case. Upon arriving in town, she's confronted with a scene that makes her question everything she thought she knew. The wooden sculptures left by the killer are exact replicas of those that Frank, the original Sawyer's father, was making when she found him years ago. But Frank died in prison 5 years ago. Maria begins to investigate and uncovers a complex network of online followers who not only idolize the original Sawyer, but have also obsessively studied every detail of the case, including information never released to the public. Meanwhile, she receives enigmatic messages from someone who seems to know intimate details of the original case. The person identifies themselves only as the apprentice. As the killings continue, Maria notices a pattern. Each crime seems to recreate a specific aspect of the original murders, but with a new twist. It's as if the killer is trying to perfect the Sawyer's work. Maria finds herself in a race against time to decipher the clues and prevent the next murder. She also struggles internally, questioning whether her pursuit of closure and unintentional fame inspired this new wave of violence. The investigation leads Maria to confront her own history in a new way. She begins to suspect there may be connections between the new killer and people from her past she thought she had left behind. As she delves deeper into the case, Maria realizes she's being drawn into an elaborate and deadly game. The new killer isn't just recreating the past, but seems to be building towards a grand finale that somehow directly involves her. The story reaches a critical point when Maria receives an ultimatum from the killer: face them alone or watch the entire town become their bloody playground. This new direction of the story explores themes of legacy, the cyclical nature of violence, and how the past can continue to shape the present in unexpected ways. It also questions the role of media and popular culture in creating legends around criminals. Maria decides to face the killer, but not without carefully preparing a plan. She shares crucial information with the police and places a tracking device on herself. The killer directs her to a familiar location, an abandoned metalworking shop on the outskirts of town. Upon entering, Maria finds herself in a surreal setting. The interior has been meticulously recreated to resemble the original metalworking shop from her youth. As she cautiously advances, a voice echoes through the sound system. "A welcome back, Maria. Let's finish what began so many years ago." The killer reveals themselves. It's a woman around 30 years old. She introduces herself as Lily, the daughter of the cult leader Maria helped capture a decade ago. Lily explains that she grew up obsessed with the Sawyer story, blaming Maria for her family's destruction. She spent years studying every detail of the case, training, and planning her revenge. A deadly game begins, with Lily forcing Maria to relive distorted versions of her past traumas. Each test is designed to break Maria psychologically. During the confrontation, Maria discovers that Lily isn't alone. The apprentice from the enigmatic messages is revealed to be Lucas, the former lawyer of the original Sawyer, who became fascinated by the case and helped Lily in her obsession. As the situation intensifies, Maria uses all her knowledge and experience to try to turn the tables. She appeals to Lily's humanity, trying to show how the cycle of violence and obsession only leads to more pain. The climax arrives when Lily, in a moment of fury, attacks Maria with a chainsaw. In an intense struggle, Maria manages to disarm Lily, but is wounded in the process. With Lily defeated and Lucas captured by the arriving police, Maria has a final moment with her antagonist. Lily, crying, asks why her life had to be defined by this horror story. Maria, bleeding but compassionate, tells Lily, "Our stories don't end with our traumas. They begin with how we choose to overcome them." As sirens approach and paramedics arrive to tend to Maria, she watches Lily and Lucas being taken away by the police. She realizes that the true end of this saga isn't about catching killers, but about breaking the cycle of trauma and obsession. Months later, recovered from her injuries, Maria visits Lily in prison. She offers psychological help, determined not to let another life be consumed by this dark story. The narrative ends with Maria reflecting on how the past will always be with us, but it's our choice whether it will define us or inspire us to create a better future. 5 years later, Maria, now 50, has transformed her experience into a life mission. She expanded her foundation to include an innovative rehabilitation program for people obsessed with violent crimes, aiming to prevent future incidents like Lily's. The case of Lily and Lucas generated an intense national debate about the glorification of serial killers in media and pop culture. As a result, several streaming platforms and publishers adopted stricter ethical guidelines for the true crime content. Maria wrote a new book, Breaking the Cycle, which became an international bestseller. In it, she not only recounts recent events, but also offers insights on how societies can deal with collective trauma and prevent the spread of violence. Lily, still in prison, made significant progress in her therapy. She and Maria maintain regular correspondence, with Lily gradually finding ways to redefine her identity beyond her traumatic past. Lucas, convicted as an accomplice, collaborated with researchers to better understand the psychology behind the fascination with serial killers. His insights led to new treatment protocols for individuals with similar obsessive tendencies. The metalworking shop where the final confrontation occurred was demolished. In its place, the city built a community center dedicated to violence prevention and support for trauma survivors. The original Sawyer's son, who remained in prison, began giving talks to at-risk youth, sharing his story as a warning about the consequences of violent choices. Maria was invited to lecture at various universities, where she combines criminology with trauma psychology, training a new generation of professionals better equipped to handle complex cases. Globally, the case inspired a reassessment of how societies deal with notorious crimes. Several countries implemented programs based on Maria's model, focusing on prevention and rehabilitation, in addition to punishment. In an emotional ceremony, Maria received an International Human Rights Award for her work in violence prevention and victim support. In her acceptance speech, she emphasized the importance of empathy and understanding in breaking cycles of violence. The epilogue ends with Maria visiting the memorial of the Sawyers' original victims. She leaves flowers and reflects on her journey. As she watches families and young people passing by the site, now a space for reflection and hope, she feels she has finally managed to transform a horror story into a legacy of healing and positive change. Maria smiles softly, knowing that while the past can never be completely erased, the future is full of possibilities to break negative cycles and create a more compassionate and understanding society. 20 years after the original events. Sofia, Maria's adopted daughter, now 25, decides to follow in her adoptive mother's footsteps. With a degree in forensic psychology, she initiates an ambitious project, a longitudinal study on the children of victims and perpetrators of violent crimes. Sofia's study brings together a diverse group, including the original Sawyer's son, now on parole, the daughter of one of the original victims, Lily, who was released from prison after serving her sentence, children from families indirectly affected by the case. Sofia organizes regular meetings between these individuals, creating a safe space for them to share their unique experiences and challenges. Meanwhile, Maria, now 65, takes on a more advisory role. She works with international governments to implement crime prevention and rehabilitation policies based on her model. Sofia's work reveals surprising patterns. Many participants struggle with a sense of the survivor's guilt or inheritance of evil. Some have developed extraordinary skills in empathy and resilience. There's a common desire to rewrite their family histories. A documentary about Sofia's project gains worldwide attention, generating discussions about nature versus nurture, the intergenerational impact of trauma, and the possibility of redemption. During the project, an unexpected challenge arises. One of the participants begins to exhibit worrying behaviors, reminiscent of the Sawyer's patterns. Sofia finds herself having to apply everything she's learned to prevent a possible recurrence of violence. Maria, observing her daughter's work, reflects on how her own story continues to have repercussions, but now in ways she could never have predicted, generating understanding, healing, and prevention. The climax of this new phase occurs during an international conference where Sofia presents her findings. Unexpectedly, Lily asks to speak. In an emotional moment, she publicly apologizes to Maria and shares how the rehabilitation program changed her life. The epilogue ends with a powerful scene: Maria, Sofia, Lily, and other study participants planting a tree in a new memorial garden. Each person adds a handful of soil, symbolizing how their individual stories have intertwined to create something new and hopeful. As they observe the newly planted tree, Maria hugs Sofia, proud of how her daughter is carrying her legacy forward in innovative and impactful ways. They know the work will never truly be finished, but they feel hope seeing how the seeds of change they planted continue to grow and flourish. This new direction explores themes of legacy, redemption, the intergenerational impact of trauma, and the possibility of transforming negative experiences into positive forces for social change.